We knew that an examination of collecting modern Latin American art would not be complete without a presentation on the marketplace, and we also knew that Marianne Martin would be the person for that assignment. A native New Yorker, she joined Sotheby's New York in 1966 and trained in the field of Impressionist and modern paintings. And in 1977, she organized the first Mexican paintings auction, not so long ago when you think about it, that was ever held in the United States, and 2 years later founded Sotheby's Latin American department. In 1982, Marianne left the firm to start Marianne Martin Fine Art, a gallery devoted to the promotion of classic and contemporary art from Latin America. In May 1990, she made auction history from the audience side of the podium, purchasing Frida Kahlo's Diego y Yo, the first Latin American painting to sell for over $1 million. In addition to running her gallery, Marianne frequently writes and comments on the Latin American market, consults on matters of authenticity, and advises collectors and curators. Over the past 25 years, she has developed a fascination with art fakes, and she has collected hundreds of photographs of false works that have been submitted to her for purchase or expertise. She's frequently asked to lecture on this topic, which is of vital importance to collectors thinking of entering the market. Marianne has served as Senior Vice President of the Art Dealers Association of America and was a charter member of the Selection Committee for Art Basel Miami Beach, where she served for 10 years. This morning, she will speak to us on how the art market shapes collecting decisions by individuals and institutions. Please welcome Marianne Martin.
Not quite good afternoon, good morning, and I will probably not be as fluent or educated as my predecessors in this conference, but I'll do my best. And I must say a lot, I'm sorry, okay. I just wanted to thank you all for coming and for inviting me, and I don't expect to give you a really intellectual talk, but I'll try to give you an idea of what the history of the Latin American market, and in particular the Mexican market, has done, and also what I found when I became interested in it in a very undirected way. I sort of stumbled into something that I wound up living with for the rest of my life. Let's see if we can do. What is Latin American art? Sometimes I think it's a Frankenstein monster. I'm partly responsible for creating that. Latin American art as a marketing category originated with a benefit auction for the America Society at Sotheby's in 1979. At the time, I was head of the modern paintings department at Sotheby's and had already organized 2 annual auctions of Mexican art as an experiment. One was in 1977, the first one, and the second in 78. As the catalog went to press for the benefit auction, I was searching for an umbrella term to describe all art from Mexico and to Argentina. South American art was inaccurate as it left out Central America and the Caribbean and Mexico. Some people sometimes forget that Mexico is in North America. I've seen that in very prestigious brochures from, it's a surprise to me. Latin American art covered all bases and did not suggest any ethnic associations at the time. Perhaps that's changed, but in those days, Latin American art was more of a geographic thing. We went with it. The auction was a success by the standards of the times. At the end of the evening, the auctioneer announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, this was $1 million sale." And you're laughing. In those days, $1 million for an entire auction, and that includes sometimes Impressionist and modern auctions, was a big number. That was the start of a twice-yearly event and a fierce rivalry between Sotheby's and Christie's. They entered the fray in 1981 with their first Latin American auction after watching us for a while. And it's not a team, but I just came from Sotheby's. It was unusual for auction houses to organize specialized auctions in fields where there were no dealers, or not many dealers, or museum curators, but in this case, the success of the sales themselves helped to revive interest in an area that had been forgotten or repressed for a generation or more in favor of other artistic movements. The Cold War, as I'm sure you know, and Hugh X shed suspicion on Depression-era art made by communists. The abstract expressionist movement in U.S. made figurative art seem old hat, even though it would be noticed later on, and I mean much later on, people are starting to write about it, that Jackson Pollock's use of unorthodox materials and drip paintings stem back to his days as a teacher in the experimental workshop on 14th Street. I grew up on 13th Street, but I didn't know about it. I guess I have to click it. Yeah. Is this going to move? Okay. Pollock participated in the 14th Street workshop formed by Siqueiros in 1936. Here is a blurb I found on the National Gallery of Art Washington site, elucidating their painting by Pollock called Lavender Mist. The Mexican muralist argued that to be socially transformative, art needed new materials and methods. He encouraged his helpers to use commercial paints to splatter and throw color, to roughen the paint textures and go to work on canvas tacked on the floor. So this is what's going on in 1936. This is, I really have to start doing this. This is a painting that I have handled a couple of times. It's a three-dimensional painting by Siqueiros incorporating oil, peroxylin, and ceramic on panel. It has been on loan for several years to the Americas wing of the Boston Museum of Fine Art from a private collector who got it in 2010. It is hanging next to a Jackson Pollock. If you look on the small detail on the right, you'll see some drips, and you'll also see that it says Siqueiros, 1936. This is David Siqueiros, David Alfaro Siqueiros, The End of the World. It is now under consideration by another institution. While the details are confidential, I can assure you that the price of this work is a mere fraction of that of a Jackson Pollock. We've all seen this a couple of times. It's on our brochure, and this three-dimensional paint, I'm sorry. I'm now going to show you a series of works giving their prices at the beginning of this new market, or when I entered it. It wasn't really a new market, it was a sort of a revived market. Their values 30 or more years later. Paintings of this type are iconic examples of Rivera's work. As Anna explained, he painted them for clients because, among other things, he had to earn a living. And very few exist in private hands. Many dealers have requests for these paintings. I mean, I have standing requests for them, but there's no supply for the market. A few works are located in Mexico, but national patrimony laws forbid the export of these paintings, so they are not available to the international market, by which I mean anyone who doesn't live in Mexico and intend to keep the work in Mexico. This creates a two-tiered value system. Paintings legally out of the country are more valuable than paintings in Mexico. This also creates a temptation to smuggle works out of the country and to fudge the provenance. This is not a good idea for multiple reasons, not the least of which is that everybody knows who owns these paintings. Okay. What? Oh, there we go. This comparison is interesting, and I think especially since we've just talked about Diego Rivera, I want to warn you that I am going to be speaking quite a lot about Frida Kahlo, not necessarily because I'm obsessed with Frida Kahlo as an artist, but because it has gone from a small tickle in the throat to a viral, well, it's a viral infection, maybe not an infection, but Frida has gone viral. If I use the first name Frida or Diego, that is sort of a common thing to do in Mexico, so I'm not being presumptuous. This comparison is interesting to me, as these pendant self-portraits have been sold 4 times. When I was at Sotheby's in 1979, this Frida went for $27,000. I had 2 full-size self-portraits in the sale, one after another. I mean, this could never be repeated, but in those days it was like picking fruit off trees. Diego sold in the same sale for $50,000. So $27,000, $50,000. Today's values have altered the husband-wife balance, and Frida now out-earns Diego in most instances. I'm not going to talk about the question of rarity, but there are a lot more Diego Riveras than there are Frida Kahlos. This was not the case when the paintings were commissioned by the American engineer Sigmund Firestone, who asked the artist to paint 2 self-portraits, life-size, beautifully executed, both the same size and duly inscribed by both. The agreed price was $500 for the pair to be divided equally, even though Rivera was then a much more prominent and successful artist. Both artists were very much in need of the money, as the portraits were done in 1940. That was Frida's. In 1941, Diego delivered his a little late because he painted another version that wound up at Smith College. But anyway, he did get his done eventually after numerous letters from Sigmund Firestone and very apologetic letters from Frida, who was acting sort of to cover Diego. Both artists were very much in need of the money, as the portraits were done during the year when the couple was divorced. They later remarried. 25 years later, this Kahlo portrait was sold privately to a European collector for $5,250,000. Diego was sold to a Mexican collector the following year for $1.2 million. I had tried to sell them as a pair, wanting to put them back together as a couple, but it really boiled down to whether or not I wanted to give the Diego away, because Frida was what certain people were looking for. So I split them up again for market reasons, sort of like for tax purposes. Diego was sold to a Mexican collector the following year for $1.2 million. I had tried to sell them as a pair, but I already said that. The Diego returned to the auction market in 2009, where it brought only $1,022,000, so it actually went down a little in value, or in price. Value is a different thing. Okay. I thought this would be a good moment. I'm glad you're laughing. I thought this would be a good moment to introduce 2 points. First, the phenomenal rise of interest in the life and art of Frida Kahlo, and the consequent interest, or revived interest in some cases, in Diego Rivera. Second, the increasing number of fakes, or what I'm now going to refer to as fanciful additions to her oeuvre on the market. It's become, I'll get to this, but it's become very risky for someone who, in a situation like mine, to say something's a fake. So it's an interesting painting. Like this unrecorded little painting, signed Frida Kahlo, was submitted to me for my opinion several years ago. Like most experts, I have become very wary of expressing my views, but I did tuck the image away for further study. What I like about it is the way that the author has reversed the old view of Diego and Frida, or their relationship, to conform to latter-day popular opinion. Frida has become the saint of women who triumph over oppression, of the physically challenged, of bisexuals and lesbians, of women with philandering husbands. Frida turns her drawbacks into advantages, emphasizing her hairy eyebrows by creating the wing-like unibrow, a word that seems to have come into the language. It certainly wasn't in the language when I came into this. She's wearing colorful Mexican costumes to disguise her polio shriveled leg. And as Kahlo admirer and collector Madonna, I mean collector, she has several, sang in a song called Vogue, which I must admit I've never heard but have been told about. She strikes a pose. I'm going to do you a favor of reading some of the lyrics but not singing them. All you need is your own imagination, so use it. That's what it's for. Go inside for your finest inspiration. Your dreams will open the door. It makes no difference if you're black or white, if you're a boy or a girl. If the music's pumping, it will give you new life. You're a superstar. Yes, that's what you are. You know it. This song by Madonna and its possible connection with Frida was not my original observation. I actually read it in an article in Vanity Fair in 1999 by Kahlo biographer and my good friend Hayden Herrera, in an article called Why Frida Kahlo Speaks to the 90s. Okay. I now wish to apologize for the repeated use of works by Kahlo in this talk. Let's just say she is a metaphor for the rising interest in this field. Okay. In 1982, I arranged a private sale of this painting through Sotheby's for $60,000 to a Houston, Texas collector. One of the reasons I arranged this sale was that the owner of the work, which was not then national patrimony, wished to raise some cash in order to buy a Diego Rivera. That was Dolores Almeida. Let's see. This work was again sold at Sotheby's, or publicly in 2006 for $5,600,000 plus, and that is the public record price, the published record price. The auction atmosphere was surprisingly flat at that sale, with only one, quote, absent bidder who was going against the reserve or the minimum price. The purchaser was said to be Madonna. A couple of works have sold privately since then for $7 to $9 million. Drawings, by which I mean maybe diary pages or little sketches that she gave to people, routinely go for $200,000 to $300,000. She never really did an edition of prints. There's a print that exists as there are like 18 proofs of it, and there was never a published edition. And we haven't found all 18 of them, but perhaps 12 or 13 have gone on the market, and they're very desirable because they sort of tell Frida's story in one picture. I am often called upon to provide third-party insurance values for works by this artist that are traveling to exhibitions. One painting that is currently on view in a Frida Kahlo exhibition in Rome right now, as we speak, is insured for $30 million. The owner's insurance company has informed the collector that it will refuse to accept the risk in the future. For this reason, the owner has decided not to lend the painting ever again. So this is an example, in a way, how the market affects collecting decisions and will affect curating requests. In the title of my talk, I suggested that the art market shapes collecting decisions by individuals and institutions. The mounting popularity of artists like Frida Kahlo, and there are a few artists that have this charisma in this field. Again, they're not necessarily aesthetic value, but charisma. And the virtual unavailability of her work on the international market have propelled Kahlo into the trophy item category. Not many collectors have $10 to $30 million to spend on a single Frida Kahlo or Rivera, or Tamayo, or Siqueiros. We'll get back to them. When there are such trendy contemporary works available, like the Christopher Wool painting that brought $21 million this past Tuesday, or the Warhol that bought $56 million. I'm going to show you the Christopher Wool. So what could I do with $21 million? And I'm not making a judgment. This is a subject for another kind of discussion. But this is not. Let's just say that this is not my area of expertise at all. Okay, did it go? What's a possible solution to this difficulty in borrowing works? Returning to the subject of Frida mania, which is another word that's been in the language a little longer, there is a traveling show of 123 exact size replicas of all of Frida's paintings. They cannot be seen anywhere else, according to the the PR, made by talented Chinese artists for hire. These are not fakes, and they are actually, this is kind of strange, they're authorized by the Frida Kahlo Trust, chaired by Carlos Phillips, who's the son of the late Dolores Olmedo, director of the Dolores Olmedo Museum. If you go to the website called CompleteFrida.com, and I'm not making this up, you should do it, you will see the discreet note that these replicas are painted by master artists and licensed by Banco de Mexico Diego Rivera y Frida Kahlo Museums Trust. These replicas were first shown together in Baden-Baden in 2012. You can see some installation shots there. Much to the consternation of Dr. Helga Prignitz-Poda, who's co-author of the Kahlo catalog raisonné, because she was then curating a Frida Kahlo retrospective in Berlin, which then went on to Vienna. The problem is people don't understand the difference between the replicas and the real thing. So I kept looking online, here's an online comment from an internet travel site, July 4th, 2012. Yesterday we took a trip to Baden-Baden and stopped at the Frida Kahlo Museum near the rail station, 10-minute walk. It was a wonderful place, and we were surprised to learn that it has the largest collection of work by Kahlo in the world! Exclamation point. Her father came from Baden-Baden, which is the reason for the museum. I recommend it if you want a touch of Mexico in Baden-Württemberg. Okay. Okay, I don't know how this came out. I had to try to steal this from the internet, and I'm not a technical expert. This show then traveled to San Diego, California, where it closed on May 11th, 2014. Oh dear, you just missed it. It was extended a little. According to the Huffington Post, Dr. Mariella Raymond and her partner, Hans-Jürgen Gerke, have invested 30 years in a passionate project to show all of Frida's paintings together. The show includes 2 scale replicas of Frida's paintings, a recreation of the artist's studio and bedroom, and replicas of the artist's personal belongings, jewelry, drawings, accessories. Is this harmless? Whatever it is, I don't think it has anything to do with the art market. Meaning that the people that go to these shows and think that they're seeing real Frida Kahlos are probably not the people that are going to come up with the $10 to $30 million for a painting or the $100,000 for a sketch. Here are some comments posted beneath the Huffington Post article, which was, the Huffington Post article was a little bit alarmed. The first 2 statements are, 1, if I could meet one woman in all history, it would be Frida Kahlo. Second comment, you and me both. She has long been my absolute favorite, a woman ahead of her times in so many ways. So, you make of it what you want. Let me see if I can move this along. Okay. I promise to move on to other artists. As I said, the art market shapes decisions made by collectors and institutions. A sad consequence of the Latin boom is that important works by artists like Rufino Tamayo are now sufficiently valuable to become candidates for deaccession by institutions with ailing finances. This 1945 Tamayo oil, Troubadour, was owned by the Meyer Museum at Randolph College in Virginia and was sold at Christie's in 2008 for $7.2 million in order to fund operations for the college. The Virginia Supreme Court ruled against an injunction filed by the students and donors to try and stop the sale. It had been donated to the college in 1949. The issues here are twofold. It's ironic that small teaching museums are forced to sell their art in order to keep running, because they won't have any art to show. Second, I've had a number of conversations with collectors who are reluctant to donate their artworks to museums because they fear they will eventually be sold to benefit museum operations. They reason that if the works are going to come to the market eventually, they might as well sell them themselves and make their own decisions about what to do with the profit. Following the record price of the Rufino Tamayo Troubadour in 2008, these two important Tamayos came up at auction. The watermelon slices, which to me is a study of reds, much like a painting by Mark Rothko, was sold at Sotheby's in November 2011 by MoMA, New York, for $2.2 million plus. It was painted in 1950 and donated to MoMA from the Lewison collection in 1951. Doubtless the funds received will be used to purchase other works that the curators find more relevant to today's visitors, and possibly contemporary Mexican art, or Latin American art, which I know is a consideration. But I don't know why it is certain that a painting like this is disposable. A similar situation occurred 2 years ago at Christie's in November 2013 when the Cleveland Museum of Art offered the 1946 Tamayo Women Reaching for the Moon. This painting, which was donated to the museum in 1947, brought $1.445 million. The funds are intended to build up a bank so that the museum can purchase a 1940s Matta, which they had one, but it wasn't what they wanted. The museum owns another Tamayo. This is the Cleveland, museum, owns another Tamayo, also very important, but they are from different periods and neither one is replaceable. In my conversations with the curator who consulted me, I made the point that in 20 or 30 years, critical assessments of these artists might change. Where is it written that Matta is more important than Tamayo? And I think in previous lectures here, we've already heard that, something can be considered very important at one point, then curators decide something else is important, then art history changes. So when you have something that you're not going to be able to replace, I don't quite know what the solution is, but I think selling major works of art has to be thought out very carefully. And I thought to myself that I'm like a funeral director advising people not to die, because obviously I do sell art, I do get things, I did work at Sotheby's, these things it's nice to see them come on the market, but very often you never see them again, and that is a problem. Let's see. This large painting called Spalanca, 1949, by the Chilean surrealist Matta, was sold to a private collector when I was at Art Basel Miami Beach in 2002, which was shortly after the artist's death, and it went for $1.1 million. Matta's work is now recognized as international. I'm putting that in quotes, not merely Latin American. He really was one of the great and last surrealists. Having a Matta brings many more collectors into the competitive arena. This includes some American museums who are trying to catch up, and that has become an expensive proposition. When I first came into this market, Matta really was not that expensive. Okay. Matta paintings from the 1940s have increased greatly in price at auction in the past few years. Quality and condition vary from work to work, so it's important to consider the usual factors of quality, rarity, condition, provenance, and authenticity. Sometimes auction estimates can be way off, reflecting more the competition among auction houses to get top material than the specific value of the work being auctioned. This painting was a first-rate example, and the record price of more than $5 million reflects that. Wifredo Lam is another artist whose reputation has entered the international category. And I don't mean, I mean, they were international, then they were brought into Latin American, now they've been set free again as international. But I mean, when I talk about that, I'm talking more about who's interested in buying one of these works. Wifredo Lam has entered the international category. A comparable painting, quite comparable, from the Reader's Digest collection, and you heard about corporate collections yesterday, graced the cover of the first Latin American auction that I did in 1979. It brought $99,000, considered a very fine price at the time, and bought by a Venezuelan collector who was very, very farsighted in these things. This painting brought over $4.5 million, which is now the current auction record, which I don't actually think is that much, but well, you get four of these, or one Christopher Wool back. Okay. Okay, I'm going to try to go through these quickly. A female artist whose work is much sought after and much falsified. Amelia Pelaez was born in Cuba. She died in Havana in 1968. When we first had pictures like that in the auctions, the most that anything could bring was $25,000, because that's the most that any Cuban who had moved to Florida had. So this painting went at Christie's for $350,000 and was sold at Art Basel Miami Beach in 2007 for $800,000. I'm going to try to go through these quickly. The world record for Mexican artist Gunther Gerzso, an artist I consider vastly underrated, is $620,000. It was sold at Sotheby's 3 times for $50,000, then $150,000, and then $620,000. The painting on the right, Aparición, 1960, from the estate of Jean Gerzso, the artist's widow, is a work I once predicted would be the first $1 million Gerzso. That hasn't happened yet, but it is really a pivotal work in his career. I'm going to try to go quickly. Works by Brazilian artist Serge Camargo have shot up in recent years. This relief brought $2.165 million at Sotheby's last November. Probably that is connected to the financial boom in Brazil, which goes up, goes down. I had works by Camargo from him directly when I first started my gallery in 1982. He had just left the Gampel and Weitzenhofer gallery, the Gampel gallery in London, and I could not give them away, which is sad because they were wonderful. This Mathias Goeritz was sold to a cultural foundation. I believe very, very much that works by this man who was principally known as an architect during his life, but did many, many important interiors in the US and in Israel, many places, that this is an artist that you should watch very carefully. Sorry. Okay, I'm going to go fast through Botero. Okay, I'm going really, really fast. Works by Botero started one way, they ended up another. Sometimes they've gone up, then they've come back and gone down. This is a picture that's coming up May 28th at Christie's. We'll see how that goes. One of the strangest things I've noticed is that his sculptures have become much better known. His sculptures have become much better known than his paintings. I was once doing an art fair where a person walked into the stand and said, "Oh, he did paintings too?" So let's go. new interest in Latin American art. I'm pretty much going to skip that because I think it's been covered in the last 3 lectures. Changing demographics in the U.S., art fairs and the internet. Collectors can find works on the internet. They can contact galleries. There is one caution, which is you can find fakes on the internet. You can find fakes on eBay. There were 5 very odd works in the last ArtNet internet auction, which were subsequently removed. But I find it amazing that people can confidently buy things in that way without looking at them or checking them. Yeah, okay, I've got 2 more minutes. Okay, we're not going to go into Frida Kahlo anymore. I promised you I wouldn't. I am going to talk about one more thing very briefly. Yeah, yeah.
In the question period.
Okay. I am now going to not show you any fakes. There's one, okay? And since we looked at the calla lilies, this is an authentic work, which was actually in the Dwight Morrow collection. The work next to it is questionable, and one really wonders how this little boy, who seems to be wearing a permanent press outfit, could have found those calla lilies down in that canyon. A lot remains to be learned about these things, but I will end here. Okay. Have we turned it on?